Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, you're listening to the voice of the American Dissident, and I'm your host, Jeffrey Whittla. Tonight we're going to be talking about the United Nations, and we're going to get the other side of the story, because it's always been portrayed in the American news media, and it's being educated to your children that the United Nations is a benevolent organization and working for the betterment of the world and the American people. Well, tonight I'm going to read to you a document that was uncovered by me again. The document is in original form as I found it on the internet, and I have that uploaded to www.scribe.com. My ID there is Silver Saber Wolf in one word, and we will go to the document and we will take a look at it. As you can see, it says the United Nations Charter, testimony of Mrs. Helen V. Summers on the United Nations Charter before the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The chairman, give your name and your residence and whom you represent to the reporter. Ms. Summers, my name is Helen V. Summers, and my address is 2914 Cedar Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I just represent myself, the organization of the United States government, the people of the United States. The chairman, that is a good representation. Go right ahead. Ms. Summers, Mr. Chairman, I wish to place upon the record that I am an American woman, a mother, that I am pro-America and pro-peace, anti-nothing, but I resent the propaganda from any foreign source that tries to interfere in our domestic affairs. Members of the Foreign Relations Committee, I am before you today, July 11, 1945, to voice my opposition to the United Nations Charter, which is the betrayal of our constitutional republic, and in doing so I am expressing the sentiments of thousands of other Americans who cannot be here to do likewise. I definitely oppose the United Nations World Charter because it will change our form of government by setting up a world government and a world court. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9 of the Constitution specifically states that Congress has the power to institute inferior tribunals only. If our people wish to change our form of government, it can be done only by amendment, by the vote of the people. Consequently, any ratification is illegal. The United Nations Charter will set up a superstate, because you cannot have a world court without a world government and a world dictator. There will be no freedom, only slavery. George Washington warned against interweaving our destiny with that of any other nation. How do I know of the plan to set up a world state? Well, I have been very fortunate in learning of the British Israel World Federation movement, whose symbol, the unfinished Pyramid of Giza, appears on our $1 bills only, placed there in 1935. In 1893, Andrew Carnegie wrote a book entitled Triumphant Democracy. The last chapter, a look ahead, in it he says, "Time may dispel many illusions, destroy many noble dreams, but I shall ever be of the opinion that the wound once caused by the separation of the child America from its mother England will not bleed forever. Let men say that they will. I say, as surely as the sun in the heavens once shone upon Britain and America united, so surely is it one morning to rise, to shine upon and greet again the reunited States, the British-American Union." He left all of his money for the accomplishment of that objective. This world movement of the British Israelites is identical with the Andrew Carnegie, Cecil Rhodes, Theodore Herzl plan to return the United States to the British Empire. The British Israel literature boasts of Britain being mighty and that she will be mightier to rule the world. What is to happen then to our beloved United States? Where will we be? Can't you see? Gone with the wind? No. Not if the women of this country have anything to say about it. Never will we betray our country to any foreign power. General Patton, speaking in London to the Officers' Club, said, "It is our destiny, Britain and America, to rule the world." In British Israel, you will learn that Edward, Duke of Windsor, is to be the Messiah, the King of the world. In an article in the True Story magazine, Wally, sunning herself on the beach at Nassau in the Bahamas, dreams of the day when the common people of the world will call on Edward to lead them and become the first president of the United States of the world. Senator Pepper expressed the same thing about President Roosevelt. Congressman Huber wants to know how the Duke of Windsor, the repudiated leader of our ally Britain, can travel around our country with a private coach and crew while our soldiers and civilians are denied transportation facilities. Gentlemen, Edward the Duke is here surveying our land and looking forward to the day you ratify the United Nations Charter, and he then will become King of the world. You will find the evidence right here in this folder. The Chairman, you may file the folder if you desire. Mrs. Summers, it says, His Excellency the World Potentate shall create, organize, build, acquire, maintain, use, and command such armies, navies, air forces, and other military means together with all properties, structures, devices, and means which he deems essential there in this role, in his sole and absolute discretion, necessary to maintain and restore peace throughout the world. And ladies and gentlemen, what she was talking about and testifying to in this document, the federal government has already accomplished, as I've mentioned in many broadcasts. You need to Google State Department Publication 7277 and read it in its entirety. It's available in original form, a PDF document, as it was found in government records. And the statement here, what she just said about Edward of England, is the same plan to disarm the United States and to disarm the world. His world, I suppose, and shall use them for other purposes whatsoever. Now here's a picture, gentlemen, of the world flag hanging in the British Israel World Federation meeting in London, England, 6 Buckingham Gate. The Chairman, just file that and go ahead with your testimony. Mrs. Summers, you will also see the picture of the flag which is to fly above our stars and stripes. On February 4th, 1944, Scholastic magazine conducted a poll in 1,303 high schools throughout our nation, asking our children 7 questions, the last of which was, are you willing to see a flag of the world fly above the stars and stripes? This questionnaire appeared in the Junior Post of the Upper Darby Junior High School of Pennsylvania. This chart compiled on the subject proves it is all one world movement. Gentlemen of the committee, do not be deceived. The proponents of this measure are either wolves in sheep's clothing or just dupes, for no sane American would knowingly vote away our sovereignty. Surely you men won't vote yourselves out of office. The Chairman, please use the microphones. Some of the senators cannot hear you well. Mrs. Summers, on April 9, 1944, at the last meeting of the Forum in the Upper Darby High School, the subject of the discussion was world government. Professor Fraser of Swarthmore College spoke on the political and economic aspects after advocating world government, world court, world bank, world currency. He concluded his talk by saying, you will have world government whether you like it or not. It will be accomplished more through the religious-minded than the political. Rabbi William Feinschreiber spoke on the moral. He sanctioned all Professor Fraser said, and when questioned later as to his being a member of the World Fellowship Incorporated, the special counsel of which is World Government Foundation, whose founder trustee is Charles H. Davis, who was repeatedly urged our Congress to empower President Roosevelt to set up and create the Federation of the World, a world peace government under the title United Nations of the World, including its constitution and personnel. Charles Davis prophesies, if world government is not established before this war is over, the world will be headed toward a third world war on the soil of the United States. Members of this committee, this statement should be investigated. In my studies, ladies and gentlemen, and I've been studying this for over 20 years, there were 3 world wars planned. And as fantastic as this may seem to sound to you, these world wars were planned as far back as 1881. The First World War was fought to establish the League of Nations, but then at that time our Senate still had the political savvy and the patriotism to reject the League of Nations Treaty. The Second World War was fought to establish the United Nations, and in 1945 the United Nations Participation Act was signed by President Harry Truman, and the United Nations Charter was pushed through and signed by the same president. And the Third World War, ladies and gentlemen, will be fought, and it will be fought to establish the United Nations as the supreme ruler of this world. When it will be fought and who will be on opposite sides, that remains to be seen. But it's a very interesting statement that Mrs. Summers, in her congressional testimony, believes that the Third World War will be fought on United States soil. And with the economy the way it is, our Congress blatantly ignoring our Constitution, trying to disarm the American people through assault weapons bans, United Nations small arms treaties, it may be a prophetic statement indeed. April 13, 1945, at the town meeting of the air held at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, under the auspices of the Salvation Army, the subject for discussion was, do we have a definite foreign policy now? Congressman Judd, who took the negative side when questioned as to the legality of Carter Hall's advocacy of an international organization with an international court, admitted it could not be done within the Constitution. They would have to circumvent it. On November the 18th, 1944, at the National Convention of the Kingdom Message Association, which is an affiliate of the Anglo-Saxon Federation Convention held in the Hotel Whittier, 15th and Cherry Streets, Philadelphia, the Reverend Lewis Fowler presided. The whole back of the stage was covered by an enormous British Union Jack, and on the left corner a small Stars and Stripes. Mr. Fowler said, "The old order must go. Every nation must be pulverized, because only Israel is to survive," he said. "Even the foundation stones must go." Around 1991, ladies and gentlemen, President George W. Bush was quoted as saying, "It is in these principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter that we shall henceforth pledge our allegiance." George W. Bush, a so-called quote-unquote conservative, elected by quote-unquote God-fearing Americans, blatantly stated that the Constitution of the United States was no longer in effect, and they get away with this blatantly, and the American people continue to believe that there's nothing wrong with their nation. The old order must go. Every nation must be pulverized, because only Israel is to survive. He said, "Even the foundation stones must go." Haven't you ever noticed how all our institutions are always under attack, either by international organizations or some crazy left-wing organization? Everything that we hold near and dear to our hearts is slowly being dismantled, piece by piece, step by step, inch by inch. And I have more proof here in this document, and we'll continue. That verifies Dr. Fraser's statement at the Upper Darby Junior High School when he said, "World government will be accomplished through the religious-minded." Yes, gentlemen, these men are wearing the cloak of religion and interpreting the Bible to put over their political planning. Please get their literature and see for yourselves. There are tons of it throughout the nation. The September a year previous, Harold Rand, speaking to the same convention held here, he said, "Had anyone told you here in Philadelphia, the birthplace of liberty 25 years ago, that in Senate Bill 666 we will witness the destruction of this republic, the end of the gentile domination of the world, and then Israel would come into her own, You would not believe it, but it's going to happen. And then he quotes the Bible to prove it. On March 1st, 1945, at the Roxborough High School in Philadelphia, a forum meeting was held by the United Nations Council under the auspices of the American Legion. The principal speakers were Dr. John Nason, a Rhodes Scholar, president of Swarthmore College, Pennsylvania College, and Mrs. Borden Harriman. At the conclusion of his speech, Dr. Nason said that after full debate on the question of whether or not we should adopt the United Nations Dunbarton Oaks Conference proposals for a World Security Organization to be set up at the San Francisco Conference, he knew the American people would want it, and they should wire their senators to that effect. At the question period, I challenged Dr. Nason to debate, and he refused to do so. Then I asked the question, is it or is it not true that the United Nations Dunbarton Oaks Conference proposes for a World Security Organization to bring peace to the world is none other than the British-Israel World Federation plan for a world government, world currency, world police, world court, world religion, and a world flag to fly over above our stars and stripes? This is the flag, gentlemen, and it is treason to America, and a woman will never let it happen. There it is, that flag. The chairman, your time is about up. You have another minute. Mrs. Summers, only yesterday, former Governor Harold Stassen of Minnesota told this committee that the Charter does not assure us that it will prevent war. Yet the American people and even the members of the committee are given the impression that it will prevent war. In conclusion, gentlemen, I pray that God Almighty will inspire you, and so blessed with the knowledge presented to you by the opponents of this vicious plot to destroy our republic, you will, like our founding fathers in the First Continental Congress at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, humbly kneel in prayer and ask Almighty God in the name and through the merits of Jesus Christ our Lord to give you the strength and courage to vote against this vicious charter. And by doing, your names, like Washington, will be immortal in the annals of American history. You will then vote against this vicious charter. Senators, all of you, I beg of you, you whom we have elected to represent us, please, gentlemen, do not let us women have to fight these wolves in sheep's clothing alone. Be men like those that William Cullen Bryant wrote about. So live that when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan that moves to the mysterious realm, where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death, thou go not like the quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust, approach the grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams. Thank you. The chairman, thank you very much. The chairman, please be in order. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, there were people in the United States that had the intelligence and the sophistication to understand and know just exactly what the Charter of the United Nations meant for the American people. And sadly, it fell upon deaf ears. As I said before, look at all the wars and the conflicts that have been fought since the United Nations Charter was created. The misery and death of Korea, Vietnam, Yugoslavia, Bosnia, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Rwanda, Burundi, Katanga province in Africa. There's a little known book that many of you probably don't even know exists. It's called The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. And it documents in great detail the systematic destruction of an entire nation by United Nations coalition forces. Katanga, ladies and gentlemen, wanted to form a republic with the exact same constitution that we have here in America. And those forces that want to create a new world order cannot have any nation on the face of this earth living in freedom. And I am going to find another document that we will discuss And I'm going to go into my files, and I will try to find it here, so please be patient with me. In my course of studies, I look for a great many things, and I always look for things in true and correct and original form. And some of you may wonder how I do this. I search every site, every archive, every website that you can imagine that exists on the internet, and with diligence and perseverance, it's easy to dig up the truth. And I always find truth in original documents. I will not use a reprint ever on this broadcast, because in my opinion, if it is a reprint, it isn't the truth. And we're going to bring this document up. And this document, what it was originally entitled, Mayor Hyland of New York, Warnings on International Banking. Mayor tells Chicago audience, a third party is certain if reactionaries prevail. Bewaits wealth lords. And this article, I'm sorry I forgot to tell you, was written in the New York Times in 1922. Hughes and Oil, Mellon and Tariff with Ku Klux Klan share an attack. Fears snares of Europe. Harding is going the same way Wilson went under money powers, he says. Special to the New York Times. Control of the machinery of the United States government by the international bankers and wealth lords was charged in a speech by Mayor John F. Hyland of New York City before the Cook County Real Estate Board here tonight. In an interview before the speech, Mayor Hyland added Governor-elect Gifford Pinchot of Pennsylvania to his usual trio of Senator Hiram W. Johnson of California, William R. Hearst, and Rodman Wanamaker as the type of man who ought to be nominated for president in 1924. Mayor Hyland said, "The wealth lords would undoubtedly try to dictate the nominees of both the Democratic and Republican parties. What each party wants," he said, "is a man whose sympathies are with the people and not with gold, a candidate with a proven progressive record." Excuse me. I have to go back up. And we will go back down. Mayor Hyland was in decidedly aggressive mood when delivering his speech. He attacked the Harding administration, Secretary Hughes, Secretary Mellon, the tariff law, the American Sugar Refining Company, the Standard Oil Company of the Berwind White Coal Company, which supplies fuel to the Interborough Rapid Transit Company of New York City, British propaganda, and the Ku Klux Klan. The mayor declared that the wealthy and selfish interests often sought to destroy politically public officials who opposed them, and said this might have been his fate if he had not been for the support accorded to him during the attacks of a hostile press by the newspapers of Mr. Hearst. He also intimated that it had not been for the international bankers, this country might have escaped the World War. One of the most astounding facts about our American life is that the wealth and property of the country and the control of the machinery of government are in the hands of less than 2% of the inhabitants. Mayor Hyland said, "This is to say, a small group of excessively wealthy individuals, members of the Republic and Democratic parties alike, have through the exercise of powerful, sinister, and too often unlawful influence usurped the government and seized public property on such a whole-scale scale that they have become the virtual dictators of the destinies of more than 110 million people." Well, ladies and gentlemen, they've become the dictators of the destinies of over 400 million people now. And as I said, that this article was written almost 100 years ago as charged by the mayor of New York, and it still continues to this day. This is a situation which, to my mind, constitutes the greatest menace to the safety of our republic. A small group of international bankers and moneylenders, public utility exploiters, and tariff beneficiaries have actually dictated nominations for offices up to the presidency. That's quite a charge, isn't it? And it's coming from a politician, ladies and gentlemen. Shall I read that statement again? A small group of international bankers and moneylenders, public utility exploiters, and tariff beneficiaries have actually dictated nominations for office up to the presidency. So if you think, once again, ladies and gentlemen, that there's any difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party, you are sadly mistaken. They have placed the slickest, cleverest, and most cunning manipulators in official positions, even in the minor posts, where they could be of service when called upon by the invisible power which, utterly devoid of all humanity, seeks but to wallow in riches. This invisible power, whose black and menacing form hovers over every fireside in the land, stealthily and secretly reaches out and seizes in its filthy paws our vaunted institutions of free government with the same ruthlessness and relentlessness as the grim specter of death pursues its numberless victims. So absolute is the power of America's secret dynastic rulers that they have without hindrance written the very platforms and pledges of political parties, and because of substantial contributions to campaign chests, they have arrogated to themselves the right to dictate the government policies of the administration elected to office regardless of party. Woe to the public officials who dare to resent their dictatorship. If there be such public officials who will not submit to their imperious dictation, then the floodgates of lying press propaganda are released, sweeping the unhappy public servant to an earthly as well as political grave, or compelling him to compromise with his conscience and become their subservient tool to the end of his term. I say to you in all candor that either alternative might have been my lot, and that I might not now be mayor of the city of New York, if one of the greatest, most useful of citizens, and through his publications, the most powerful individual in the United States, William Randolph Hearst, had not enabled me through the columns of his newspapers in Greater New York to present my side of the city administration's case to the people, and thus offset the deluge. Excuse me, because it went not to where I want, and I do not know what happened, but we will continue. And I believe that that was the end of it, because I did not get it all downloaded, and I am terribly sorry about that. But as you can see again, ladies and gentlemen, that this just is more proof, and I'm trying to take you through all the history as far back as I can go, that there's nothing new that goes on in the United States, that this is the same old plan to control wealth, to control political parties, and the mayor of New York City in 1924 admitted as such in a paper that was read by millions of Americans. Ask yourself this question: with the laws that we have in this day and age, would you even see an article like this ever written? And I would think that the answer to that question would be a resounding no. And I'm going to find another document that we are going to go through. And this document has to do with the United Nations. And what's interesting is the beginning title: Peacekeeping, Peacemaking, and Coalition Warfare, the Future Role of the United Nations. Wasn't it President George W. Bush in the first Gulf War who said that we must get a coalition of nations together to fight Saddam Hussein? And wasn't it in the second Gulf War that President George Herbert Walker Bush, President George W. Bush said that we must gather a coalition of the willing once again to fight Saddam Hussein? And this document was found in Norwich University. Peacekeeping, peacemaking, and coalition warfare, the future role of the United Nations. Proceedings of a conference co-sponsored by National Defense University and Norwich University. This was written in 1994. This paper suggests that evolving global security efforts should focus on the unique gray domain between high-intensity warfighting in the archaic NATO sense and peacekeeping in the classic UN sense of lightly armed, virtually unopposed cops on the beat. Isn't that first statement in the document quite telling? It states quite clearly there that the United Nations peacekeepers want to be virtually unopposed. They want to be your cops on the beat. And through the United Nations Participation Act and the United Nations Charter, those cops on the beat policing America could be from Russia, could be from China, could be from any nation on this earth that they see fit to come here, and likewise the American military could be the cops on the beat on any nation on the face of this earth. And once they collapse the economy of the United States, that's exactly what is going to happen. It argues that neither unilateral American forces nor ragtag volunteer UN forces can provide the regional security necessary to encourage political and economic prosperity. It is my fourth pass on this important subject. I do not believe we can evolve an appropriate global post-Cold War security structure without better understanding the nature of the central threats the world now faces. New disorders do not match old orders. Isn't it quite funny, ladies and gentlemen, how you hear that term New World Order by our politicians, and then you can go into United Nations documents and they have similar words, new disorders, old orders. That is because everything that is old will be destroyed. And when they talk about old orders, they mean the Constitution of the United States of America and our freedoms and our Bill of Rights. The disorders affecting the world in the aftermath of the oppressive global Cold War require that serious long-term attention of the civilized world. Virtually every region of disorder which detracts from inter- and interregional stability and diminishes the aspirations for both personal and collective prosperity, these disorders simply cannot be dealt with effectively by security systems designed primarily to perpetuate and petrify a tense equilibrium between two antithetical but supposedly equally legitimate approaches to politics and economics. Cold War concept of superpowers, superpower blocs, competing interregional military alliances, rigid vital interests, nuclear deterrence, and bilateral arms control have lost their relevance. Such well-ingrained distinctions as the West as a meaningful entity with its special relationships and the blind sanctity of internal affairs as an excuse for ignoring inhumanity have lost their credibility. In fact, Cold War notions of peace and war now seem hopeless oversimplifications of our real-world problems. Prompt evolutionary change is essential to deal with the new forms of danger which now challenge the more generally accepted rules of human behavior. There has probably never been a period where more governments on earth have codified what is right and what is wrong, or where there were more organizations operating beyond those established norms and standards. These improprieties run the gamut from humanitarian, ethnic, military, and political to economic trafficking and environmental. Limits of acceptable conduct are defined extensively by various government-ratified covenants, treaties, and agreements adopted through various formally recognized organizations, either global UN, World Bank, etc., functional OECD, GATT, IAEA, or regional, NATO, CSCE, APEC, ASEAN, etc. Absent a clear-cut red-blue superpower ideological contest, however, the world is ill-prepared and uncertain how to react to conflicts between civility and incivility, conformity and nonconformity, morality and legality, majorities and minorities. Bosnia has put the most obvious and shameful case in point. Controlling crimes versus winning wars or peacekeeping. Most New World disorders do not relate well to the current capabilities of the world's military forces, designed to fight each other in huge set-piece battles backed up by thousands of nuclear weapons. In fact, many current disorders would be better handled by paramilitary or non-military forces. Many are really extensions of a larger scale of previously domestic disorders. They are or started out as crimes, deserving legally accepted police actions rather than the more macho but impersonal wars between military forces. Well, I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but our Constitution specifically defines what a crime is. It's an attempt, just an attempt to deprive somebody of their life, liberty, or property. War is not a crime in and of itself. People do not go to wars. Government goes to wars. And they use people as pawns in their game in order to fight wars. So, in reality, this statement, what they're saying is that they're trying to circumvent the sovereignty of all the nations on the earth, and they want to give the control to the United Nations. Unchecked, some of these crimes have clearly grown out of control and do not honor the extensive codes of professional military conduct, which outlaw rape, torture, starvation, civilian attack, hostage-taking, etc. They are now clearly beyond the capabilities of typical police forces. Although the UN has recruited thousands of civilian policemen for duty in Cambodia, Namibia, and elsewhere, they are simply useless in areas where well-armed criminal elements are bent on pursuing their illegal activities. In resolving many of these disorders, the objective clearly cannot be to defeat the criminal element or stop the killing, but only to control the level of violence and destruction to some level of international social tolerance. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, by that own admission, that the United Nations isn't really an instrument of peace. It never has been an instrument of peace. Their whole object is to control. And even those people admit and know what human nature really is. You will never stop all the violence in this world. You will never stop all the killing. You will never eliminate poverty. You will never eliminate despair, because it's the law of the universe. For every action there's an equal but separate opposite reaction. Light cannot exist without day. Life cannot exist without death. If there's somebody that's rich, there's always going to be somebody that's poor. And to deny that is to deny our entire existence and our entire recorded history. And these people with their pie-in-the-sky utopian dreams are going to go down in miserable failure, as they always have throughout the history of mankind. And their idea of peace is when socialism and communism wins, and that they will be in control of the whole world. In resolving many of these disorders, the objective clearly cannot be to defeat the criminal element or stop the killing, but only to, as I said again, to control the level of violence and destruction to some level of international social tolerance. We cannot stop the war or restore peace. The terms are irrelevant. Ethnic religious strife appears to be an endemic to the New World, as are American casualties due to drunk driving, street crime, and drug use. The issue is whether it can be contained within tolerable levels, such as the decades of Irish and Palestinian violence, or whether it is allowed to escalate to levels that arouse the international conscience, such as genocide in Cambodia, displacement of the Kurds,
Congratulations.
three-way mayhem in the former Yugoslavia, or the wanton generation of refugees in Lebanon. The level of authority responsible for these organized transgressions is frequently ambiguous. Nations and our allies tend to declare and conduct war against other nations and or alliances on a government-to-government basis. This is how Webster defines war. Today's disorders may be government-directed, Saddam Hussein versus the Kurds, or Yugoslavian Serbs versus Bosnian Muslims. But they are as often subnational extremists, the Hezbollah versus Israel, or the Irish Republican Army versus the United Kingdom, or renegade multinational corporations, Latin American drug cartels, or BCCI-like banks. Furthermore, the victim is also generally not a nation or government, but some other societal or ethnic category. Current security arrangements and forces are ill-equipped to deal with non-governmental crime, and to shift focus from being anti-national to being pro-victim. Our current experiences in Somalia typify these problems. Concepts of the inviolability of internal affairs are slowly giving way to concepts of enforced humanitarianism, not only at the national level, but at the family level as well. I happen to believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the parents of a child are the ultimate authority in that person's life. And it's not up to some international organization, and it's not up to even a government organization that exists in the United States to have the authority or the right to regulate the activities of your children. You see, we're supposed to live in freedom, and a prime example of that I want to give you is drinking laws. Can anybody tell me in any logical term what right another human being has to tell another what kind of substance that they're going to put in their body? Obviously, if you're under the age of 18 years of age, society recognizes that you are a minor and that you are not an adult, and there has to be some kind of regulator to guide you through life. But is it the state's responsibility, or is it the parent's responsibility? And through the years, they're able to usurp parental authority and give it to the state, and the state will give it to an international authority. Do you see how this all works, ladies and gentlemen? They always do things in stages, and it's usually in 3 stages. How does one gain control over a child? Step 1, first you take the authority away from the parents and you give it to the state. Step 2, the state gives the authority to an international organization, and what's the accomplishment of step 3? The change in the desired result. It's total control over your children. And they admit that in this document. The battlefields are far more likely to be urban, suburban, industrial areas rather than deserts, jungles, or hedgerows, and the targets are more likely to be gangs, governmental functions, or industrial facilities than military formations. Understanding, influencing, or if necessary, controlling the urban industrial anatomy will be far more important than pinpointing and blasting enemy units in the field. What nation on the face of this earth does this document describe that usually has an urban, suburban, and industrial area? It's the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen. And what they're admitting in this document is that they believe, and that they know, and that they admit that the next quote-unquote battlefield is going to be the United States of America, and that is exactly what they're planning. Understanding, influencing, or if necessary, controlling the urban industrial anatomy will be far more important than pinpointing and blasting enemy units in the field. Urban expertise surely does not match the rural terrain skills developed, say, to defend against the Warsaw Pact invasion across the inner German border of yesteryear. Controlling arms proliferation. Even arms control has clearly outgrown the initial concepts of limiting nuclear arms and balancing the size of opposing superpower conventional forces in Europe. There are residual concerns over the possible mishandling of the major nuclear arms inventories in the remnants of the Soviet Union, and discussions concerning their retargeting are underway. However, the focus of concern has now shifted to the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction throughout the less developed world. The old Arms Control Treaty framework is irrelevant here, as are the highly formalistic verification regimes. Moreover, the signatories to the START and CFE treaties bear little relation to the new players, donors or recipients in global arms proliferation, such as China. It is also unclear in some instances whether suppliers, governments are tactically or actively involved in the transfers. Tacitly. Furthermore, the Cold War definitions of proliferation and weapons of mass destruction are inadequate. Rockets and artillery used against defenseless civilian populations in places like Beirut, Sarajevo, and South Lebanon should all qualify as mass destroyers, even though they did not recently proliferate from some opportunistic supplier, and even though the destruction took months rather than minutes to inflict. The wanton use of large caliber and automatic weapons in the pursuit of clearly illegal political activities is unacceptable, as the excessive use of firearms and semi-automatic weapons in petty crime and drug trafficking. So you see here, ladies and gentlemen, they're coming for our guns. They're coming for the guns of the American people. And how many documents have I shown you already to prove this? That they are going to come after for semi-automatic firearms in the United States, and that's not just the quote-unquote assault weapons that they plan on banning. They plan on banning your Browning semi-automatic hunting rifle, or your Remington semi-automatic hunting rifle, or your fancy semi-automatic shotgun. And the American people, not thinking and not caring, will do nothing to stop it, because initially there'll be other classes of weapons that will be allowed, such as bolt action weapons and single shot break action weapons and lever action weapons. But then step by step, inch by inch, piece by piece, slowly but surely, you'll end up with a single-barreled rifle or a single-barreled shotgun, and not long after that, they will completely and totally ban your firearms, as they did in stages in the nation of Great Britain. They did it in South Africa. They did it in Australia. They did it in New Zealand. They did it everywhere where the citizens of these countries had some measure of firearms freedom, which they do no longer have. That is another domain which is neither warfighting nor peacekeeping. One is reminded of the origins of the colloquial term rule of thumb. This was clearly an early but not unique effort at arms control, if not peacekeeping. Perhaps the civilized world should now deem it unacceptable to slay one's enemies with a firearm of caliber greater than one's thumb. Controlling the level of Controlling the trafficking, possession, and use of arms exceeding the rule could become a major responsibility for emergent security forces. In this way, we might keep disorders from exceeding our tolerance threshold. This document, ladies and gentlemen, was written in 1994. What is happening today? They're proposing the UN Small Arms Treaty. And as I said again, I'm offering you complete proof that they are doing this in stages, and that they've written their plans down long ago, and that they are following through with these plans. And then this document that I have here before you laid the framework for the United Nations Small Arms Treaty. And with the re-election of Barack Obama as President of the United States, he will most wholeheartedly and most assuredly push as hard as he can in the United States Senate until this treaty is ratified. And if he does not get his way, I predict that he will ratify this treaty through an illegal executive order, which the gutless Congress of the United States will not use their power or authority to challenge him. The cost to both the criminal and the enforcers must reflect the severity of the misdemeanor or felony. Often the punishment or coercion may simply be fines or other sanctions to express displeasure, but not exacerbate the recklessness of the violator. Policies and procedures for deterring, ameliorating, or terminating unacceptable behavior will certainly have to be legal, not wanton. The guilt will have to be correctly balanced between government and non-government investigators, or say between the supplier, the deliverer, and the demander in drug or arms trafficking, and both the breadth and severity of the crime will have to be viewed through the culture and resolved through the languages of the afflicted region. Now I find that one of the most ridiculous statements that I've ever heard, ladies and gentlemen. We have a system of laws in our country, in our nation. We have a jury system where the accused are innocent until proven guilty. And we have no correct balance between government and non-government investigators. If you commit a crime in the United States, you are tried by a jury of your peers, and you are convicted by a preponderance of the evidence. And no crime will have to be, in our nation, is viewed through the culture and resolved through the languages of the afflicted region. A crime is a crime. No matter what race you are, what income level you are, what educational level you have, if you commit a crime in the United States, you're supposed to go through our system, and you're supposed to be tried by a jury of your peers, and if you are convicted, sent to prison, or if you are acquitted, you're supposed to be set free. Additionally, use of excessive force, brutality against persons or property will have to be avoided. Neutralization and incapacitation will replace death and destruction. Deliberate swaggering overreaction, the Israeli model, needs to be discouraged, while U.S. warfighters have long sought to limit collateral damage. Where possible, crime fighters follow much more stringent limits on damage and casualties to innocent bystanders. The military preoccupation with target destruction rather than target arraignment presents a serious obstacle in their conversion to law enforcers. The enemy, criminals, will generally be protected by citizens' rights, and their offenses are as likely to be illegal businesses, drug or arms trafficking, as violent crimes. Security forces will have to operate within legal limits, even though the offenders recognize no such constraints. The offenses are not likely to be eliminated, only reduced to tolerable levels. And ladies and gentlemen, just exactly what is a tolerable level? Who's going to decide that? I find that no violence on this earth should be tolerated, that no murder should be tolerated, that no rape should be tolerated, that there should be zero tolerance for crime, that if you commit a crime, that you should be tried and convicted, period. There is no such thing in my mind as a tolerable level of violence. But obviously the United Nations, in my estimation, wants to use tolerable levels of violence in order to maintain their control, in order to foster off their left-wing ideologies on the peoples of this earth. In a different regime, there is certain to be increasing international concern for environmental transgressions, most of which are indifferent to arbitrary national boundaries. Sooner or later, physical international responses will become justified to control some form of atmospheric pollution, such as Chernobyl-like fallout, ozone depletion or acid rain, or resource abuse, such as preemption of river waters or overkill of protective species, or even the spread of communicable diseases in humans, animals, and insects. Now I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what kind of law can you pass that will stop communicable disease between an animal or an insect? That is one of the most outrageous statements that I've ever heard. And we already have laws here in the United States that deal with everything that they're talking about here. But the object of those people is to relinquish all our laws and all our sovereignty to the United Nations, and to have a sound foundation in law, such as we have here in the United States. If acid rain, or what they call acid rain, is polluting a lake in Switzerland, how would they prove, with logical and legal evidence, that the pollution came from, say, plant A in Boston, Massachusetts, or plant B in Sydney, Australia, or plant C in London, England? There is no way to do this legally or logically. And their goal is not to do anything like this legally or logically. Their goal, ladies and gentlemen, is to simply have control over everything. That has been their object, and that's been their goal ever since that the United Nations was founded. Violations of economic arrangements will be continued to precipitate armed struggles as well, from product dumping, e.g. China's opium wars, to fighting fishing rights, e.g. Iceland's fishing fleet versus the British Navy in the 1970s. As economic interdependence continues to grow and economic competition replaces ideological competition as a central national focus, the book of rules is bound to grow, and so will the temptations to circumvent it. The OECD is only now defining corrupt practices in international commerce. Trade wars may break out again, and violence over the abuse and exploitation of workers may arise. Illegal trafficking in various commodities, from drugs and arms to workers and babies, already preoccupies law enforcement agencies worldwide. And why shouldn't it, ladies and gentlemen? That is the job of law enforcement agencies worldwide, to investigate crimes. All of these people that are proponents of world government have never stated in a logical or factual term how that all of these problems, which have always existed in the history of mankind, can best be handled by one national or one international organization. One, as we can see throughout the history of the world, they can't even be handled by the nations that deal with them to begin with, because human nature is what it is, ladies and gentlemen. You will never stop all the wars. You will never stop all the murders. You will never stop all the drug use. You will never stop all the rapes. There is no such thing as peace on earth and goodwill to men. We need to recognize that A, God created us, and that He created us with flaws. And that there is only one perfect being, and that is God. And that we should never replace God with the gods of the state, because once we do, and these documents prove it, they will enslave mankind, and human beings will live in misery and hopelessness forever. And this concludes this broadcast tonight of the American Dissident, and hopefully that I've had some new listeners tonight. And I thank you for listening, and I thank you for watching, and we will be with you again next Saturday night. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.